Professor Jayashree, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Meenu, for having given me this opportunity to present the COVID-19s with special emphasis on the ICU management and the repurposed therapies. Um, I'll just share the screen and so the outline of my talk would be I would just take you all through a brief epidemiology. It's important to understand this. Only then will it be possible for us to understand the MIS-C, which is the most important intensive care need that is coming as far as COVID-19 is concerned. A brief about clinical features and presentation, which I would take along with the epidemiology. The severity and supportive care, which is very important for us, especially when we are working in ICU. Some of the repurposed therapy, what is the latest evidence and what can be done in children. And of course, the special cohort of children who are presenting with the post-inflammatory multisystem disorder, which is post-COVID, is something that is now a real cause of concern for pediatricians around the globe. So from the time the pandemic started in China, that was last year, this data, what I'm presenting is of February 20, when China saw was the first country to be affected by this pandemic. So there, out of the 2,143 children who were suspected to be COVID affected, of which about 34% were lab confirmed and the rest were suspected cases. The heartening part during the early pandemic was that only 5.6% of children qualified for the definition of severe acute respiratory illness, or SARI as we all commonly know. And more heartening was the fact that only 0.6% developed severe ARDS, and the mortality was very, very rare or uncommon in children. So, this was the heartening part of the disease in this pandemic, especially during the early part of the pandemic. So, this was the scenario in China. When we look at the scenario in USA, this also mirrored a similar trend to what the Chinese publication had told us. Out of the 2,500 odd children, they comprised only 1.7% of the total cases of COVID that were seen. And this is the data or statistics for February to April last year, 2020. Again, just one fifth required hospitalization, and only 2% required PICU care, and the mortality, there are only 3 children who died. So, again, indicating that the disease was very mild in children, and it's not something which had to be worried for, unlike what was seen in the adults in all the countries, including China, USA, Europe, and then subsequently in India. When they looked specifically at the cohort of children who were hospitalized, there were two, three things that really stood out. One of them was that the age range of the children who required hospitalization were the age extremes. That is, either they were infants, that is 0 to 2 months, or they were the adolescent, like from 11, anywhere from 12 to 17 years. Meaning thereby that these two extremes of age in the pediatric population are the high risk. And the clinical symptomatology, of course, pneumonia, which comprised about 11%. But look at this, the multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children was equivalent to pneumonia. Whereas when we look at adult COVID disease, we know that ARDS and pneumonia are probably the most sinister manifestations, and the one which causes most mortality. However, in children, the MIS-C was equivalent to the pneumonia, which was seen in these hospitalized children. Now, what was the scenario in the India? What does the Indian data show? So, in when you look at Indian published data, again you have clear distinctions: one of the early pandemic, and then of the later. So, when we look at studies of the early pandemic, we see that pretty much majority of the children were asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, and none of them were hypoxemic or required intensive care, and of course there was no mortality. When we looked at our own cohort of children who were admitted to NHE, this is the early pandemic, which is from April to July 2020, we had seen about 33 children. All of them are post-neonatal age. Again, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that majority, about 60%, were asymptomatic, and those who were symptomatic had mild symptoms. And children requiring organ support therapy or ICU was just a minuscule proportion, which were 3 out of the 33, which comprised of 10%. And usually, most of these children who were sick had underlying comorbidities, and the outcome was very good. We actually lost only one child during the early pandemic. This child had an underlying heart disease and died because of complications related to the heart disease. So the Indian trend was also very similar to the global trend, that in early pandemic, children were just bystanders. They got affected from the adults. However, they all had mild disease or asymptomatic disease, and very, very few children required ICU and had severe disease. Then there was a little shift in the epidemiology that we started seeing once there was a global peak. The global peak occurred much earlier than what occurred in India. In India, we saw the peak, especially in Chandigarh, we saw the peak between August and September last year, whereas in several other cities, they saw peaks at different times. So in a tertiary hospital data which was published from Chennai, they first reported 19 children between May and June who had multisystem involvement, predominant mucocutaneous involvement, and 63% of them required intensive care, um, had intensive care needs. However, we did not lose any patient. They did not lose any patient, sorry. So now there is a shift in the epidemiological trend. Here we are seeing that more children are getting affected, and not only are they affected, but they are more sicker and they require intensive care. Bombay started reporting something very similar. 65% had shock and intensive care requirement, and there was one death which was reported from the cohort in Mumbai. So the Indian scenario became very, very clear as the pandemic evolved. There was limited data on the epidemiological features, but initial phase, as I said, majority were mild, no mortality was reported. And as we went through last year, at the later part, we saw many children with multi-system involvement with increasing case fatality as against what we saw in the early pandemic. So this Indian scenario was very similar to what the global scenario was reporting. So therefore, now coming to the severity and supportive care. So therefore, this severe disease of COVID that we were seeing in children was being predominantly contributed by this entity, which was called multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, MIS-C. Some people call it PIMS, TS. So there are multiple names, but basically it is a post-COVID phenomenon. So when we are approaching children who are sick and require intensive care management or some kind of respiratory support, it's always better to go in a stepwise fashion. So the severity management, I have put it as initial severity and triage and severity categorization. Look for need of non-invasive respiratory support. As we all know that intubating a child with COVID-19 disease is fraught with a lot of complication because intubation is an aerosol generating procedure. So as far as possible, if we can keep patients on non-invasive, early non-invasive respiratory support, we may kind of avoid intubation. But in those where you cannot, then you have to see whether there are indications for PICU care. Then intubation has to be done with a lot of precautions with drug assisted intubation, or what we used to previously call as rapid sequence intubation, mechanical ventilation, and how we have to be careful with mechanical ventilation, organ support therapies, and several repurposed treatments. So, first and foremost, the first step at triage is to first see whether the child is sick or whether the child is not sick. And this is pretty much the same protocol that we follow here in PGI. And most of the hospitals around the globe, as well as India, they follow the same strategy for triaging. If a child does not have any severe acute respiratory illness or SARI, which means that the saturation is more than 94% on room air, there are no breathing difficulties, no tachypnea, no work of breathing, then usually such children, in fact, in the early part of the pandemic, we were not testing, just advising symptomatic relief measures like crocin, advising home isolation as per the Ministry of Health guidelines. And in some patients, we were using oseltamivir for selected cases because we were suspecting H1N1 associated or co-infection with H1N1 in some cases. This was in the early part of the pandemic when All our COVID protocol was in place. Somewhere like in April, we started and we were following this particular strategy. We still follow the same strategy, but only thing, this no testing has now been converted into universal testing. So anybody who walks into emergency gets a universal testing. And those who qualify for this part of the algorithm, which is the SARI, that is SpO2, which is less than 94% on room air, associated with respiratory distress and or retractions or nasal flaring. This becomes the clinical definition for SARI. They get admitted, they are tested for SARS-CoV-2 infection. They are started on oxygen therapy. They are isolated in a separate SARI ward or SARI cubicle. Empirical antibiotics and oseltamivir are started in these children, and from there on we decide based on the report whether the child needs to go to the COVID care facility, ICU, HDU, or just can be shifted to a ward. So this is the triaging, the initial triaging at whatever point of first contact for the patient. This particular protocol is very, very important because it decides the flow of patient within the hospital and whether an ICU care is required or not. Then we need to risk stratify the patients. Now, not all patients will be severely ill. There are children who will be mild to moderate. So, what are the two? We don't have lab investigations as soon as the patient comes in. So, therefore, all the risk stratification is done based on the clinical parameters, which are primarily the respiratory symptoms and the SpO2. Based on this, we generally have categories which are mild, moderate, severe, and critical. So, mild are all cases who have uncomplicated URI, or sometimes they can present as COVID abdomen, that is GI symptoms. However, the stratified classes which are of concern to us are those from moderate to critical. The moderate ones are those who show clinical and radiological features of lower respiratory involvement, what we call as LRTI. However, there is no hypoxemia, that is, the saturation is well maintained and above 94% in room air. The severe ones are the ones who have tachypnea with hypoxemia, who require oxygen, along with refusal to feed and altered sensorium. That means some amount of organ dysfunction has already started. And of course, the critical ones are the ones who have ARDS, shock, myocardial dysfunction. So most of the children with MIS-C generally fall into this critical category. So when we come to respiratory support, remember that all children should be started on low flow oxygen, titrate or target SpO2 to more than 94%. And this low flow oxygen can be delivered through nasal prongs or face mask. However, avoid nebulization in facilities where you do not have protection for aerosol generation. If the patient does not respond to this oxygen delivery system, then we need to escalate the oxygen. The best form of doing this, especially if the child's FiO2 requirement are more than 40%, is using the heated humidified oxygen, which what we call as the HFNC, which is a non-invasive way of giving oxygen, and it really helps patients. But there were some concerns, initial reports of aerosol generation with HFNC, and then people advocated that we can use a hood over the head when the patient is on HFNC. But this is a very good modality of non-invasively giving higher FiO2s and higher flows of oxygen to overcome the hypoxemia that can be seen with mild ARDS. If the patient does not respond to this, then we need to give some positive pressure. It's always better to first go for a non-invasive way of giving positive pressure ventilation. However, certain protocols that we need to keep in mind while using NIV is that there should be adequate seal, because if the seal is not adequate, it will release aerosols, and again there will be risk of dissemination. The NIV can be in the form of an indigenous nasal bubble CPAP also, and usually NIV is indicated in all mild ARDS. Now we have started using more of NIV than invasive ventilation in our ICU, even in non-COVID ARDS, because by early NIV, we actually can prevent patients getting intubated and going on to positive pressure ventilation. However, the most important precautions right from the point you start HFNC to NIV to intubation and mechanical ventilation is the aerosol precautions, and continuously keep monitoring the children for respiratory rate, work of breathing, the PF ratios or the SF ratio, the PaO2 FiO2 ratio or the SaO2 FiO2 ratios. Some baseline investigations are required in children who have moderate, severe, or critical kind of COVID-19 disease. Among these important ones, of course, are the chest X-ray, and point of care ultrasound has come up in a big way because in PPE, healthcare providers cannot auscultate the chest. It's easier to do an ultrasound. So point of care ultrasound should be done in all children where you are suspecting moderate, severe, or critical disease. A complete blood count, renal function, liver function, and a coagulation profile, and send off the baseline inflammatory markers because the evolution progression will help us decide the repurposed therapy, which I will be taking you through in a few slides from now. At least a baseline CRP, a procalcitonin, and ferritin is required so that we can take decisions about what drug to give the patient, especially the sick ones. Chest X-ray, in fact, is indicated in all children who need PICU admissions. This is very important. And CXR findings are not described in great details in children because, as we have already seen, the major part of the pandemic has been mild disease and ARDS has hardly been seen. And even the children with MIS-C who are very sick, characteristically, they do not have ARDS like manifestation. MIS-C generally are sick because of cardiovascular involvement, and you don't get the, you don't, they hardly show any ARDS like manifestation. So, therefore, you will hardly get any data on children which describes the chest X ray findings in great detail. Findings in adult, if we extrapolate some of the findings from adult, they usually show consolidation and ground glass opacities as like what has been seen in these two representative x-rays. Both are adult x-rays, but these are mainly peripheral, involve the lower zones, and they are mostly scattered bilaterally. So once you have started NIV and you find that the patient is not responding, then you take a call for PICU care. Then the indications for PICU admissions are clear cut. Either there is alteration in capillary refill time, which means associated shock, associated unconsciousness, hypotension, oliguria, and most importantly, non-improvement of oxygen saturation once you have used all these escalating forms of oxygen therapy, which are non-invasive till this point. The PICO isolation ideally should be a negative pressure room with HEPA filter. But we all know that not all isolations that we have all these facilities. So at least there are certain basic prerequisites that are required to kind of designate these as isolations for COVID-19 disease. It should be a single room with exhaust fan which drives out the air from within the room to the outside atmosphere. Preferably, such ICUs must be in the higher floor of the building so that the other wards, the non-ICU wards, are not put at risk. And rest of the things will be very similar to any other non-COVID ICU, the preparation, the trolleys, the multi-para monitors, the ventilators. Only difference being that all personnel who work in such ICUs, they work in their full personal protective gears. Now, intubation, which is a drug assisted intubation, is very, very important. And as you all know, constantly we keep putting emphasis on it's an aerosol generating procedure, or what is in short form called as AGP. Therefore, intubation has to be done with utmost precaution. And you can see in this particular picture, there is a plastic sheet which is put over the patient. And or you may also use this transparent sheet is easy, or you may use a plastic hood. The plastic hood generally has problems because it gives you very less maneuverability for the hands to intubate the patient. But our PICU team finds it much easier intubating with this kind of plastic sheet, which prevents the aerosols from getting disseminated. Rest of the things are very similar to what you would do. The preparedness is very similar, but just a word of caution about the kind of ambu that you use in patients when you intubate. We all know that there are two different types of ambu bags, the self-inflating and the flow-inflating bag. It is better to use a flow-inflating bag, or what we call as a Bain circuit, in children who are suspected COVID-19, because the aerosol generation is better controlled in this rather than the conventional ambu, which is the self-inflating ambu. These are some of the steps of rapid sequence intubation where we do with precautions. First is the preparation. So it's always said that in COVID-19, there is no emergency. No emergency is an emergency in a pandemic. That is what is usually said. So the healthcare provider needs to completely protect oneself before they start the procedure of intubation. So PP donned personnel is very important. All preparedness should be there. Hood and enclosure I've already talked about. Pre-medications are very similar to a non-COVID patient. Pre-oxygenation is important. Here again, to minimize aerosol generation, we generally use a mask filter bag assembly. I will talk about this filter. It's a viral filter which reduces or minimizes the aerosol generation. Induction paralysis, the drug's choice would be same depending on the physiological instability of the patient. And what is more important is that blind intubation, like you would do for a non COVID patient, is something that you should refrain from in a COVID 19 disease. We want to put the tube with the first attempt with great success. So, therefore, placement with proof or visual placement is something which is much more recommended in children with COVID 19 disease. So that's why world over the recommendations are you do video laryngoscopic intubation if it is available. This is the filter I was talking about. It is connected between the endotracheal tube, which goes to the patient, and the ventilator tubing. This is the HME viral filter, antiviral filter. Cuffed endotracheal tubes are preferred to uncuffed tubes because they are tight and they prevent the leak. Disconnection in circuit repeatedly should be avoided. Clamp the endotracheal tube if it gets disconnected. Use a two-limb ventilator circuit, and a closed suction catheter is preferred. These are all some important precautions that you take when you mechanically ventilate these children. So if you see most of these points, they are all basically geared towards minimizing the aerosol which will get generated while you are ventilating these children. Now, coming to the ventilation strategy, there is nothing which is separate for a COVID ARDS. It is very similar to any non-COVID pediatric ARDS. We will use low tidal volume ventilation with a PEEP of about 7 to 10 to generate recruitment and to generate a good compliance. Conservative fluid strategy, which is followed all over the globe for all critically ill patients, where we restrict the maintenance to 60 to 70. Liberal analgesia target to any of the pain scales that you use in ICU. We use the Comfort B scale, so we keep the score at 11 to 17. Use neuromuscular blockade if you have asynchrony, so that there is a quiet ventilation that you can do for ARDS. Now I'll talk about steroids a little more in detail, because steroids is one thing which is recommended uh, in COVID-19, especially for respiratory illnesses. So here we should use dexamethasone at the dose of 0.15 milligram per kg, single dose daily, to a maximum of 6 milligram per day for about 10 days. And prone ventilation, though it's not fully proven in children, but in adults they are using it often. In patients who are having ARDS, it may be beneficial, but one has to weigh the risk versus benefit of making the child prone, and there may be multiple disconnections, and that itself will increase the aerosol generation. Multi-organ support, needless to say, is like for any other critically ill patient, but what is more important in a MIS-C is the myocarditis, where you need to use diuretics, inodilators, and immunomodulatory therapy, which I will describe in detail. Early enteral nutrition. A little word about antibiotic. Usually, the children who present to us late with ARDS may have co-infection with other viruses and bacteria, especially if they have stayed in outside hospitals for more than 40 to 72 hours. So it might be a good idea to treat for secondary bacterial infections, even though it might have started off as a COVID pneumonia. So treat H1N1, azithromycin. We still continue to use, though evidence has kind of put it in the waste paper basket as of now. Third generation cephalosporin and anti-staphylococcal cover is something, especially in mechanically ventilated patients of COVID pneumonia, to cover a broad secondary pneumonia in these children. Now coming to repurpose therapy, because this is probably something that we everyone would want to know what to give if the child is sick. So let us see what the evidence is. So if I have to just put it in one slide, I would say that there are no therapies, no repurposed treatments that have been found to be useful in children. In fact, data in children is almost negligible for most of the things. Whatever we have are all those which are extrapolated from adults. So let us see. So this particular diagram is very important, because it tells us at what point which drug usually acts. So the first point is when the virus SARS-CoV-2 virus is going to enter the cell. So this is the point. So this is the point where people thought monoclonal antibodies and convalescent plasma can act by binding and preventing the SARS-CoV-2 from entering the cells. Once it enters, then you have 2 3 drugs which have been studied. the hydroxychloroquine, which came up in a big way during the early part of the pandemic. And then we have drugs which can kind of block the translation, block the proteolysis, that is the lopinavir ritonavir group. And then you have remdesivir, probably the only one which has stood the test of time in the last 1 year. It is basically, it prevents the replication transcription complex of this particular virus. And there are few more things, immunomodulation, which I will talk about. So let us see the treatment of SARS-CoV-2. We can easily divide into these three categories. The repurposed antiviral drugs, which were used for some other therapy, have now again been thought that they would be useful in COVID-19. So the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin combination, the antivirals lopinavir, remdesivir, and favipiravir. The immunomodulation drugs that we use, that is corticosteroids, tocilizumab, and convalescent plasma, which can also be used as an antiviral. It can have both the action. And some of the miscellaneous agents where we use where the child is very sick, there is multi-organ dysfunction, either because of coagulation pathway, so anticoagulation, and sometimes IVIG in children with MIS-C. So we all know that when when the pandemic came and when hydroxychloroquine came, there was a big kind of that this is the panacea for prophylaxis as well as treatment. However, it has been clearly shown now that hydroxychloroquine does not have any role. Just a minute, yeah. And WHO has actually removed the hydroxychloroquine arm from the Solidarity trial, and there are no pediatric data. So currently, with the second wave that we are seeing a surge in cases. So in the acute COVID pneumonia, even in adults, no one is using hydroxychloroquine either for prophylaxis or for treatment. So hydroxychloroquine is kind of a story of the past. Then coming to the drug treatment, that is lopinavir and ritonavir, they are both protease inhibitors. They have an established role in HIV management. So the repurposed from HIV to whether they could be useful in COVID-19. In vitro studies had demonstrated some activity against the SARS-CoV-2 with reduction in viral load. Now let us see what the evidence says. So again, after some of these studies, the WHO has uh, ruled out the benefit of lopinavir and ritonavir, and there is no recommendation with the current evidence that is available. So therefore we are not using these antiviral drugs in any of the acute COVID pneumonias, both in adults as well as children. Now coming to remdesivir, as I said, this is probably the only antiviral which continues to be talked about, continues to be used, and has stood the test of time. We really don't know whether it is fully beneficial, but yes, there are some reports which say that it could be beneficial. Originally, it was used in the treatment of Ebola. From there, it has been repurposed to be used in SARS-CoV-2. So the first use of remdesivir was actually a compassionate use for patients with severe COVID-19, where they found that they used it in a cohort of hospitalized patients, adults. Whatever I'm talking is all of adults, not children. They used it in severe COVID-19 patients who were hospitalized, compassionate use, and they found clinical improvement in 36 out of the 53 such patients. So that was about 68%. However, they concluded that this requires more ongoing randomized placebo controlled trial. So this was the first positive use of remdesivir that was reported. Then came the double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, controlled, multicentric trial of remdesivir, which was again done in adults aged more than 18 years. But here one needs to look at the inclusion criteria. They were all laboratory confirmed SARS-CoV-2. The interval from symptom onset to enrollment was 12 days or less, so they have used it much early. Saturation of 94% or less, which means they were all hypoxemic. Even the PaO2 FiO2 ratio qualified for mild ARDS, and radiologically they had confirmed pneumonia. So when these inclusion criteria were fulfilled, the patients were randomized to either receive intravenous remdesivir or placebo. And what did they find? They found that remdesivir was superior to placebo in shortening the time to recovery in adults hospitalized with COVID-19 and who had evidence of lower respiratory tract infections. So there again, another positive report for use of remdesivir in severe COVID pneumonia. So the current status is that the timing of administration is important. We have already seen in that figure that it basically blocks the replication, so it has to be given as early as possible. Indication should be in a moderate disease where there is pneumonia and requirement of oxygen supplementation. Somebody who does not have hypoxemia doesn't require a remdesivir. Of course, more data is required. And in there are no pediatric data, but in children also we use remdesivir, especially for moderate to severe disease where they require oxygen supplementation. Favipiravir is another antiviral where people started using it left, right, and center because of the advantage that it can be given orally. There have been some studies which show that yes, it could show some kind of improvement. However, again, it should be reserved only for moderate disease and not for mild disease. No pediatric data with this drug. Convalescent plasma, this set of slide is a little old, but if you look at the recent literature, convalescent plasma is also like your hydroxychloroquine. Now it's no longer recommended, and ICMR trial has clearly shown that there is no difference both in mortality as well as length of ICU stay. So current status not of use. Now we come to corticosteroids, which are the panacea for all illness mostly. So here in the recovery collaborative group, they were the first ones to show that dexamethasone resulted in lower 28-day mortality in adults who were receiving either invasive ventilation or oxygen at the time of randomization. So steroids definitely are useful. And then subsequently came this guidelines from WHO for the use of corticosteroids in COVID-19 disease. And they clearly said two recommendations were made by this panel that systemic corticosteroid therapy must be used. Either it is dexamethasone or hydrocortisone for 7 to 10 days in patients with severe COVID-19, and a conditional recommendation that you should not use steroids in non-severe COVID-19. So those who don't require oxygen, you don't need to use hydrocortisone or dexamethasone. There have been several reports as soon as the SARS-CoV-2 is positive, there are many patients who are immediately started on steroids. It should be only reserved for those who require oxygen and who are moderate to severe disease. So that's about, there are a lot of debate between dexamethasone and hydrocortisone, but dexamethasone has been the one which has been used more often and it has been found to be useful. Tocilizumab is an IL-6 inhibitor. So basically in children, severe adults and children with severe disease and who have severe intense inflammatory response as seen by CRP, procalcitonin, ferritin, IL-6, pro-BNP and all these inflammatory markers with ongoing or progressive multi-organ dysfunction, one can use tocilizumab to kind of calm the inflammatory storm. That is the indication for tocilizumab. Again, the timing of administration is not clear. One needs to continuously monitor the patient carefully. But here, you need a good laboratory backup. Without measuring IL-6 levels, without measuring all your inflammatory markers, it is very difficult for you to decide about giving tocilizumab to patients. Now, anticoagulation has always been a slippery road as far as children are concerned, whereas in adults, anticoagulation is started as soon as there is moderate to severe disease, because it has been clearly shown in autopsy that COVID-19, whatever multi-organ dysfunction, is all because of severe extensive microthrombi. However, in children, this kind of consensus is very difficult because anticoagulation is something which is not, even for non-COVID diseases, we don't have clear recommendation. So therefore, one of the group in which our consultant, Dr. Karthi, also was a part of these guidelines, which were constituted to when to use anticoagulation. They basically have given two groups. One is the mild group, a mild risk of venous thromboembolism, and another with high risk of thromboembolism. In both the groups, you can use subcutaneous enoxaparin in mostly in prophylactic doses. Um, so therefore, if you summarize the repurposed therapy, what seems to work in moderate disease, remdesivir. In severe critical disease, corticosteroids definitely need to be used. And what needs more studies is whether we can use favipiravir more frequently, and severe critical disease about the role of anticoagulation and tocilizumab, especially in children. Then coming to the last entity, which is important, this just to give a case example, this was a 10-year-old girl who presented to our emergency on 19 September. Remember, September was the time when we had were just seeing the peak, just the peak of COVID-19 had come down. The peak in Chandigarh was worst in August, and this child came after the peak. She came with fever 8 days with some GI symptoms, tachycardia, and tachypnea, but BP was maintained. She was treated on an OPD basis from day 3 to day 5 of the illness. Then, from day 6 to day 7, she was admitted in a private hospital, given antibiotics, tropical fever was thought of. COVID RT PCR was sent repeatedly, which was negative. She had inflammatory markers which were elevated, CRP and Procal both were elevated. The grandfather and the father had been diagnosed with COVID. They had suffered COVID positivity 6th and 13th August, just the month prior, and this child's COVID serology was positive. And point of care echocardiography showed severe left ventricular ejection fraction impairment, which was just 35, and the coronaries were dilated. So she was stabilized with non-invasive ventilation, adrenaline milrinone, and then IVIG and methylprednisolone and aspirin were given as treatment for MIS-C. So this is what is causing severe disease now. So multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, what we call as MIS-C, is resulting from abnormal immune response, which is post-virus. It is seen in children and adolescents. It has many overlapping features to cytokine release syndrome, macrophage activation, and Kawasaki disease. Many of these affected children will be negative for RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2, but positive for serology, suggesting that the acute infection has already passed and what we now have some kind of immune dysregulation, which is post-COVID. There are several criteria. Two groups have given diagnostic criteria. One is the WHO and others the CDC. We follow the WHO criteria. There is no need to memorize. It is very, very clear. And most important, what we need to remember to differentiate between an acute COVID and a MIS-C. MIS-C presents more with shock, whereas an acute COVID tends to present more with pneumonia. These are the two most important differentiating features. And this was one meta-analysis which is yet to be published, which was done by one of our consultants, Dr. Suresh. Again, fever and gastrointestinal symptoms are most common, and RT-PCR, sorry, serology positivity is more common. And you can have all elevated biomarkers in patients with MIS-C. Now, we saw 40 cases from September till date of MIS-C who came to our PICU who were sick with shock, mucocutaneous manifestation with raised inflammatory parameters. And fortunately, the deaths that have been reported with MIS-C is very, very less. It's only about 1.2% globally. They respond excellent to IVIG and methylprednisolone. So if I have to just finish off, so in category wise, if we have to see what to do, if the child presents with category A, which is mild but no underlying comorbidity, then these are some of the comorbidities which are commonly seen in pediatric. Less than 1 year is a high risk group. Heart disease, malnutrition, chronic lung disease, immunocompromised state, malignancies, CKDs, other chronic intercurrent illnesses. If a child has mild but no comorbidity, then investigations have to be done only if it is required. Monitor the patient. Baseline test you may do depending on the clinical situation, and you just need to give symptomatic paracetamol. No other therapy is required. If the child is category B, which is moderate, that is what we call as a stable SARI, but does not require any ventilation. And at admission, you can send baseline tests. You get an X-ray chest so that it helps you in monitoring. If there is any worsening at 48 hours, you may repeat the inflammatory markers to see whether there is a rising or a falling trend. Rest of the investigations you can do based on the clinical need. The drugs that are required in this category is only antibiotics, and you may consider remdesivir if at 48 hours you find that the inflammatory markers are increasing. Sorry. Here we need to get the whole panel of tests because we have to monitor closely, and these would be repeated at 24 to 48 hours based on the clinical response. And here the child is better managed in an HDU or ICU. Start antibiotics. Dexamethasone has to be started as I described. Consider anticoagulation in prophylactic doses, and remdesivir is an option that you must keep a standby. If the patient worsens, you should start remdesivir. The critical ones are the ones who have ARDS, shock, or two or more organ dysfunction. Here again, the same therapy, but remdesivir probably should be started upfront. If there are features of cytokine release in the form of high IL-6, you require a lab support here, then you may consider giving tocilizumab to such children. This is the protocol which we follow for all our sick children who are admitted in NHE ICU. And in the MIS-C group, which is the sickest cohort in children that we are seeing, the first line IVIG should be administered to all patients, 2 gram per kg over 12 to 24 hours. And children who present in shock should also receive additional methylprednisolone and start enoxaparin or low dose enoxaparin at prophylactic doses. Aspirin, if there are no evidence of coronary dilatation, you start in prophylactic doses. If there is evidence of coronary dilatation, you increase the aspirin dose to therapeutic. And review at 48 hours. If the patient doesn't respond to the above, then you may think of starting anakinra or infliximab or any other biological. So to summarize, there are with the second surge that we are seeing, the increasing hospitalization can be due to MIS-C. You will see more children with MIS-C coming sicker to the ICUs. Infants and children with comorbidities are the high risk group. So if you see any patient who's an infant and children with comorbidity with SARI, which may be stable, they are high risk and they need to be monitored very closely. COVID pneumonia, ARDS is very uncommon. Remdesivir and corticosteroids, of course, we are using in children also like adults, but needs more evidence in children. And IVIG is first line for MIS-C, followed by methylprednisolone in those who have associated shock. Thank you very much for the opportunity given. I will be happy to answer questions. I hope I have maintained my time.
And
I'll
thank
just
you so much, ma'am, for this explanation about